Hey everyone, and welcome to another video on the Kaiju League. This is going to be a four-parter. I have three standard battles that happen during the weekend, and then one mega battle that all the players participated in. And I figured just for viewing convenience, I would put it all in one video. I don't have a whole lot of time to spend editing this week, so this might be a little bit faster than my typical video formats, but hopefully it'll still be easy enough to follow. Having said all of that, sit back and enjoy the battle reports. This first battle is a catch-up game for the Wood Elf player on the King Ghidorah team. He, unfortunately, is going to have, I think, 2 missing games in total, but one of them we were able to basically get a battle in before the Mega Battle happened, and that'll be the case with the next one. So what that means and why I'm kind of just stating that in advance is my halflings have already done and registered basically this battle for their army at this point in the league, which means I won't be rolling on injury tables or level ups or getting any XP or anything after this. So he will get all those things, but it just means a little bit more is on the line for the Wood Elves in this one than the halflings. Some preview images of the armies here. I believe my halflings are getting to around 1,400 points, and my Wood Elf opponent has around 13 to 1250. So I do have a little bit of a point advantage, even though I did hold off on making my purchases after my last game that I did. So a little bit of an advantage on the halfling side, and we'll have to see if the Wood Elves are able to overcome that. He bought a very nice looking dragon for this battle, and we'll have to see how that does as well. I can't really recall too many of his other purchases. I think he did get some more Eternal Guard and just a couple of upgrades on his hero. He might not have even purchased those, he might have just found some of those upgrades during exploration phase and in treasure chests and stuff that have been present in the league. So on the deployment phase here, my opponent set the board up, and one side kind of had that nice watchtower position, and my side had this little brewery house with a little fence line on the side of it. I didn't get to pick. My opponent picked the watchtower side. I got this brewery house side, and I figured those fences look awfully nice for the halflings. If you've been following the league, you know that they love tucking themselves into a nice defensive fence. And these are Wood Elves that actually don't have a ton of range. They have a lot of fast-moving, hard-hitting melee capabilities. So I figured these fences actually might get used in this battle. Despite me typically having shorter range than most factions, this is one of the few battles where I might be able to actually really have a range superiority on the battlefield. And it's not like a short range superiority. Deploy my artillery and pantry guard in the center. The pantry guard are flanked by the vigilantes on their right, and in front of them is a unit of archers. To the right of the hot pot is another unit of archers, and further away to the right of them is the Knights of the Waffle House. They're kind of hiding behind that hill there. And then on the opposite flank, the far left, is my little halfling steam tank and my halfling dog riders. That is my deployment. My opponent put his dragon close to the center with the unit of Wild Riders. The right side, where the Waffle Knights are matching off against his other unit of Wild Riders, as well as his archers. And then on the far left side is a big block of Eternal Guard. They're going to be facing off against the steam tank, as you can see. Again, I'm going to be moving a little bit quick through this. His dragon kind of blitzes up the board into my archer unit. His Wild Riders divert from my Waffle Knights and decide to try to go into the flank of the Vigilantes. I had a unit of archers to the right of the hot pot, but you will notice they disappear rather quickly. He rolls 2 6s and a 5 on the Arrow of Kurnos. It's like the Hail of Doom arrows, I think. I don't actually play Wood Elves. But it's the one that lets you get 3d6 arrow shots, and that character will pretty much kill my entire archer unit in one volley. The other one will definitely get munched down by the dragon, and his hero charged into that unit as well. Other than that, I will just get a lot of shooting attacks against him. I think I kill half of the Wild Riders before they make contact with the Vigilantes just with shooting attacks. He also is charging into fences. He might lose like one of his guys due to dangerous terrain. I also will be getting the -1 to hit because of the fences. All that stuff. The combats really don't go that bad for me. The Eternal Guard are where he has a little bit of favor. He chips a couple of wounds in on the steam tank. My Hound Riders are unfortunately a bit cowardly in this battle and will fail their morale test, and unfortunately they're at a bit of an angle right now, so they'll just run right off the board. And that side's looking a little bleak. The middle is not looking too bad, though. After he munches up my archers, the Pantry Guard are in a prime position to take the overrun charge of the dragon. His character actually wasn't able to make it in there. And yeah, I mean, I have a frenzied strength 6 unit there, and like 3 or 2 characters in there. I think that dragon's dead. The Wild Riders take down about half of my Vigilantes on the opposite side, but they are slowly and steadily kind of chipping that unit down, and the Knights of the Waffle House are repositioning and getting ready to charge into the rear of the Wild Riders and just kind of finish that combat off. The Steam Tank holds strong throughout this whole game. Manages to kill a couple of the Eternal Guard. Eternal Guard chip in 2 more wounds over the rest of the game, but the Steam Tank is left lingering on 2 wounds remaining before the battle ends. When we go back to the combat with the dragon, it is just chopped down by the Pantry Guard. I think he used his breath weapon earlier on the archers, and he didn't have it for the Pantry Guard, but I don't think it really would have made a huge difference. He does kill a couple of them, but I don't think it gets a chance to do a Thunder Stomp before it dies. And yeah, that was pretty much the game at this point. It was a victory for the Halflings, but there were a lot of casualties on our side. I think the Wood Elf player played pretty efficiently. He just said it was kind of a lack of knowledge of my army, and he just think he had poor matchups with the battles that he chose to make. If he reconsidered kind of how this game would have played out a second time around, he said he would have felt much more confident. So, you live and you learn kind of game, and he was a really good sport about it too, so, you know. Now we will move on to the second battle report. This is another catch-up game. The Orcs and Goblin player on the King Ghidorah team, despite having played me a couple of weeks ago, and that being the battle that I counted as my league battle before this mega battle, the one I mentioned earlier, he did not, and he was confident he was going to get a game in over the break that we had, the little holiday break. And then he ended up showing up a day early for the mega battle and was like, hey Cam, I didn't actually get the battle in, so we need to get a game in quick. And yeah, that's why we ended up playing another battle, Halflings against the Orcs and Goblins. I really don't have a ton of footage of this one, so I'm just going to be very quick about this. You can see the little deployment set up here. What ends up happening is my Hound Riders go up the flank of his Goblin unit, where his chariot is, and trigger his Fanatics and make him kill his own chariot. I think he does kill my Hound Riders, but he did not think that was funny. And then the rest of the game, I am just barraging him with shooting. He is getting pretty bad luck with his misfire dice. I believe he had his first Doom Diver over the course of the entire league finally suffer a blowing up misfire result. I know, it's kind of crazy, right? I've lost my hot pot like 3 times at least over this league. This was his first time. But unfortunately, it seemed like the dice gods just threw all of the misfortune they could at the Orcs over this game, and it was just really rough. It was over by like the start or end of turn 3. He had his Black Orc unit managed to make it across the board and almost into combat, but everything else was kind of dead at that point, and he was like, yeah, there's no point in taking more losses here and having to roll more injury results, so he decided to rout. And that's another victory for the Halflings, but again, this won't count as like 2 extra victories for me, because these are make-up games for the other players. But we have caught up on everything, and we are now ready for the mega battle. It would be fun to throw this in quick. I'm not going to do like a whole little battle report on it, just a quick couple of snapshots here. A couple of the guys wanted to get in a 4th edition Warhammer 40k game. I'm not exactly sure why they settled on 4th edition. I think across like most communities on the internet, it's like one of the most cherished editions, and that's why they decided to play that one. Basically, my buddy just started getting into 40k recently. He inherited a ton of minis. He got Eldar, Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, I think Orcs, and I know like Eldar and like one other faction I'm probably forgetting about. But yeah, so he's been kind of going full board Warhammer 40k, and he wanted to bring all the new stuff he got over and just try a little game out. I didn't really play in this one. I was just an observer. Thought it would be cool to throw in a couple of photos here of some old school Warhammer 40k minis, and yeah, that's about it. Moving on to the Mega Battle now. So the gimmick for this Mega Battle was neither side had control of a Kaiju monster. Again, if you've been following the League's videos here, you'll know typically there's a big Kaiju monster that appears in each of these Mega Battles. But neither side is starting with one. Instead, there's a cauldron in the dead center of the battlefield, and that will mark the emergence of our Kaiju for this battle. At the very end of turn 1, it will appear. And basically what's going to happen is both teams are going to make a little silent bid for control of this creature by offering it their power crystals that they have accumulated over the course of the league so far. And if you win the bid, you get control of him for that full turn, and then after that, control is relinquished, and there's another bid, and so on and so on. And if no one bids for him, he just goes after the closest enemy unit or tries to gobble up the closest power crystal if there are any. So that is the gimmick for this battlefield and the spiel on our Kaiju. This is some shots of our deployment phase and a couple of showcasing of the armies that are present. I know I already covered the Wood Elves here, but we got some shots of the Mud Dogs and my Halflings as well. So this time the Godzilla team was down a player. Obviously I am playing on that team with my Halflings, and then we have the Empire player as well. And the Team Ghidorah team has the Wood Elves, the Orcs and Goblins, and the Vampire Counts. So yeah, we're down a player. And what we will do in these situations, if you haven't watched any of the prior battles, is we will take the point difference between the two armies facing up against each other here and give the team that has the deficit basically a mercenary force. We decided to take some Ogre mercenaries, so if you're curious why they are on the battlefield on our side, that is why. They're basically making up for that third player that we are missing right now. So some things to make note of here in terms of deployment and the matchups. I am kind of faced off against the Orcs and Goblin player, an absolute classic matchup. We just always seem to end up fighting each other in these big battles for some reason. The Empire player is kind of occupied in the center of the battlefield. He's more so fighting the Wood Elf player on their team, but there are some Orcs and Goblins that could easily kind of shift over to that area of the battle. And then on our far right side of the battlefield, right side being like if you're looking at our side of the table, that right, it would be our opponent's left, is where the Ogre mercenary force is located. We didn't have a ton of Ogres to kind of spare for that side. Obviously, Ogres cost a lot, and I mean, they do a lot, but when you were kind of looking at it, it didn't look like we had a huge presence over there. So I ended up sending my cavalry force over there, the Hound Riders and the Knights of the Waffle House, and the Empire players sent a couple of handgunner detachments over there as well. So that is, for the most part, our situation for the deployment. On, again, their side of the board, Orcs and Goblin player facing up against me, Wood Elf player kind of facing up against the Empire, and I would say the Vampire Count player is basically facing up against the Ogre and Coalition of the Empire and Halflings on the far right side of the board. And that is pretty much all the matchups that are going to occur. There's all kinds of little Vanguard shenanigans that happen before the battle actually begins. I remember I wanted to do a Vanguard on my unit, but I think the Wood Elf player or one of the, maybe the Orcs and Goblins, they managed to get a Vanguard so far forward, it basically denied my unit being able to advance with theirs. I could only retreat or just hold my position. So I didn't really get to do too much in terms of shifting around pre-game stuff. More my ally, the Empire, there. You can see he did quite a few vanguards. He put his pistoliers up near the central objective, kind of positioned along a fence line, and I think on the opposite side, he had another cavalry unit moving up. That will cover deployment. First turn is mostly just shooting attacks exchanged against each other. The Wild Riders might be able to get a deadly little charge off on those pistoliers that vanguarded up in the middle. I can't quite remember if it happened on turn 1 or turn 2. I do know they will be caught and killed at some point early on in the battle, but they might be able to shoot down a couple of the Wild Riders before that happens. Additionally, it's hard to see the dragon that the Wood Elf player has, but it's blending into his little pink forest on their side of the battlefield. He will blitz his dragon across the center of the battlefield very early on and try and target the Empire player's big halberdier unit. My cavalry will be moving up the far side with the ogres, and I'm trying to just basically delay the undead's advance. We have a lot of range on that side of the board, and we're hoping to use it to pick off the undead and get as many wounds in on the dragon as we can. Our first turn, maybe the second turn as well, we let loose a huge volley of shooting attacks on the dragon, and I think we dealt an incredibly underwhelming 1 wound to it. Yeah, you can see the little wound counter there. Cannons, ogre man-eaters with poisonous pistol rounds, handgunners, the works, and all we got was 1 wound. Really tragic. I do remember, though, the cannonball just overshot the dragon, and it splattered like a Wild Rider and 3 or 4 Eternal Guards behind there, so it wasn't all completely for nothing. My Hot Pot and some of the Halfling range on my kind of area of the battlefield is able to deal some pretty substantial wounds to the Orcs and Goblin player. I don't exactly destroy a whole unit or anything, but it's not too bad shooting-wise. When it goes to their side, the Undead player, now, I've mentioned this before, he's playing a 6th edition Von Karstein list, and he has a lot of corrupted human levies on his team. He kind of just shoots down my Hound Riders and a few of my Knights on the first turn, and it was a bit of a morale hit. And he also put Curse of Years on my Knights. I think that got 1 or 2 of them. We will dispel it when it's our magic phase. But yeah, the Ogre side of the battlefield early on was looking a little bit bleak, I would say. The center of the battlefield is looking pretty even, I would say. The Forest Dragon is able to close in with the Empire player. My side of the battlefield, though, where I'm fighting the Orcs and Goblins, I think things are looking really good. He wasn't able to get any charges off with his chariots. His biggins were moving up kind of slowly, and I think they might have failed to charge. And he's got a lot of stuff kind of deviating around the far edge of the board where that tower is. He's got like squigs and stuff going around the side, and that buys a lot of time for me to just get as many shooting attacks as possible in on him. So, all kind of favorable things happening on my side. The middle is kind of contested, and it seems like the coalition ogre mercenary side on the far right is not looking too great. 2 other big things that went down on these early turns was the Vampire Count player recently took a Dogs of War cannon. It's a very short range one, strength 7, 24 inches. I think it can move and shoot, though, because it has like a little horse-drawn part of it. But yeah, he shot that at our Ogre Iron Gut unit, and it had man-eaters or something else behind it, and it killed one of the Iron Guts, 2 wounds to another, 2 wounds to the Ogre behind that, and then like 1 wound to another. Like, it was a picture-perfect shot. You can actually see it right there, the wound counters, very briefly in the video. But yeah, they had a great shot. And then at the start of turn 2, the King Ghidorah team is going to win the bid for the Kaiju. And as you can see, it is not one of the Godzilla Kaijus. I've been doing that for all of these, and the final battle is actually going to have some Godzilla proper Kaijus on the field. So I figured, let's do a Warhammer one for once, and I busted out my Great Unclean One. And he will serve whoever feeds him the most power crystals. And his first order of business was stomping across the battlefield and letting a noxious, like, pestilence breath attack out at the giant halberdier unit that the Empire has. Needless to say, it did a lot of casualties. And as you can also see, the forest dragon that has been moseying across the battlefield, it'll either be turn 2 or turn 3, will also charge into the halberdiers. The halberdiers will eventually be able to take that dragon down, but it is at a high cost of troops. And there will also be a Wild Rider unit that kind of moseys along and tries to get into that fight, but it's a little bit too late. They'll get charged by the halberdiers, and unfortunately the halberdiers are unable to win that combat. I think the Wild Riders get assisted by another unit that redirected to that area of the battlefield, and they managed to chop down all the last of the Empire. The ogres are kind of standing strong on the far side with my knights, just trying to shoot down as many of the undead as possible at this point, as those are the only opportune targets, but eventually the big block of Graveguard with the vampire and a White Lord BSB close in, and they just kind of finish off the Iron Gut unit. We also took like a unit of Lead Belchers or something, I think. Lead Belchers are man-eaters, and they will kind of get finished off about halfway through this game as well. That far side, the only thing that we actually end up having left by the end of the game is the Knights of the Waffle House. They get a little bit stalled up fighting the Vampire Count Knights and the Black Knights, sorry, and a couple of conjured up units of zombies. They do okay in their combats, but yeah, the right side's a complete loss. The middle is crumbling, and the only hope we have left, it seems, by the start or end of turn 3, 4, is my halflings. I was able to put a significant dent in the Orcs and Goblin force and actually start redirecting stuff towards the middle of the battlefield. Additionally, on turn 3, we will win the bid for the massive Kaiju. That's right, Papa Nurgle comes and helps our side now, and he decides to immediately charge into, actually he did not charge, the Orcs and Goblin player charged a unit of goblins to try and slow down this massive demon. There was his unit of Black Orcs, his like prime unit, right next to this big demon, and I don't think he wanted it getting charged. Unfortunately, the goblins will get slaughtered in like one turn, and we had the second turn of sequences. So basically, when it was their turn, they charged in with the goblins, they all got killed, and then the demon turns around and charges into the Black Orcs. I did not roll the dice for that combat, my teammate did, and he told me somehow the Black Orcs couldn't even get a single wound in on that thing, and pretty much just got slaughtered. So that pretty much solidified our control of the far left of the board. The far right is under complete control of Team Ghidorah, left is Team Godzilla, and the middle is a bit of a contested zone. I would say their team has a bit more of a controlling presence there, but I have a lot of range still left. I've got 2 hot pots, like 2 units of archers, a little bit more than just that, some like range on my heroes, and like a melee hybrid range unit as well. So I just kind of start shooting everything possible at this point, and my shots are pretty devastating. Enough so that it kind of evens out the battlefield, but at this point, it's basically just my halfling army versus the entirety of their team. And I'm fortunate enough that, like I said, we did win the bid for that big demon, at least for 1 or 2 turns, and I have that helping us out. Eventually, both sides stop bidding on the demon, and it actually kind of works out for us because he was way closer at that point to the Team Ghidorah forces, and yeah, he just decides to go on a rampage and start tearing apart all the closest units, which happen to be their units. Because of this, it really starts to even the gap between my halfling army and all the remainder of their team. I mentioned early on in this video when I first fought the Wood Elves, they don't have a ton of range. I think he's got like Deep Wood Scouts, maybe they're Wave Watchers, but I think they're Deep Wood Scouts. He's got like 10 of those and a hero with a bow, and that's about it. And I start shooting back at him, and I think like after a little bit, that unit's reduced to like half strength, and like after that, they really don't have much range power remaining. So the cannons that the Vampire Count has, though they are mobile, are on the complete opposite side of the battlefield. and are pretty much unable to make it into effective range before the game's going to end. So that is kind of what's going to carry out in these last couple of turns here, especially turn 4 and 5 here. It's really just a big range exchange and a massive Nurgle demon running amok on the battlefield. You can see in the photos there that demon is quite close to the Black Orcs, and I'll point it out when the Black Orcs are kind of moved to the opposite side table edge. That's them just being picked up and taken off the board, in case you were confused at all. But yeah, after that, the demon just kind of goes after a power crystal that's over there. You can see that in the video as well. That actually isn't picked up yet. And then it just goes into, I think, his Arrow Boys, and then the Doom Diver as well. So it just, like, has a chain of devastation kind of going down on these final turns. The Eternal Guard that were marching across, like, the middle of the battlefield heading towards my halflings just decide to run tail and turn around because they start getting lit up by the halflings and realizing how bad that situation's going to be. And that is pretty much the story of the game at this point. As much of their stuff as possible that's melee based is just going to run away towards the undead area of the battlefield where it's nice and safe and out of my range of occupation. And then all of their range units are going to try and get within like that kind of skirting distance of maybe just out of my range, but in their effective range so they can take shooting attacks. But yeah, the last turn 5 and 6, a lot of those little dancing shooting attacks, I will say, don't go too well for them. And at the end of the battle, when we start calculating everything, there's a bit of a surprise, folks. I lost my Waffle Knight unit, like the actual knights, and my Hound Riders, and took a couple of other little casualties, lost some archers and stuff. You'll have a picture in a couple of moments here of my survivors of the battlefield, but I really didn't take many casualties. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for my ally. The Empire lost every single one of their men, and the Ogre Mercenaries also lost all of their men. Now, when you kind of do the point matchup there, it seems like it's pretty cut and dry that I'm going to lose this, but once I started adding everything up, I realized, like, that Great Unclean one started just finishing off all the surviving Orcs and Goblin units. He pretty much had, like, nothing left, maybe, like, one unit at the very end of the game. The Wood Elf player had one unit of, like, the Deepwood Scouts with the hero, and then a couple of the Eternal Guards still remaining. Like, pretty much lost all of his stuff. And the Undead player, I would say he was the best off on their team, but he also had probably one of the smaller armies in terms of the points that he brought to the battlefield here. He hasn't been doing the best when it came to exploration and some other stuff, campaign related. So, yeah, when we added everything up, it was still in favor of them. And if you're one of those people that just kind of looks at, like, the very minutia of the points difference, you can call this a victory for Team Ghidorah. But the league does not operate like that. In order to have a victory, you need to have a 200-point lead over the other team to actually have a victory. If it's anything less than that, it is considered a draw. And when we added everything up, I think I had about like 1,200 points, maybe like 1,100 points or so left on the battlefield. And it was less than that 200-point difference. I think they had maybe like 1,200, 1,250 remaining on their side of the battlefield. It might not look like they have that much left, but they did claim one of the power crystals during the game, and any of the ones that you grabbed on the actual battlefield, if you didn't use them, they would give your team 100 victory points. And I think that's one of the big reasons that it actually ended up being a draw in the very end here. That demon ended up helping me out quite a bit, you could say, near the end there. But yeah, pretty exciting, and I definitely wasn't expecting that. They were kind of egging me on for the last 2 turns. Cam, just give up, it's over, you can't win against all of us. And after they started witnessing all of the shooting attacks that the halflings were capable of at that point, they kind of started shutting their mouths and running away with their melee units as quick as possible. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to close the gap as quick as I wanted to. If I could, or if I could have grabbed one of those power crystals, I think maybe I could have even turned this into a victory in the end here. it kind of just goes to show, like, any game of Warhammer you play, you can kind of step back and reassess it, and there's, at least to me, it always seems like there's that possibility that there could have been a victory if you just played things a little bit differently the next time around. And this was definitely one of those games. I'm sure the other team felt that way as well, but yeah, it ended up being a draw as far as the league's concerned, and it was a pretty damn fun mega battle at that. We are moving on to the final battle in this video. We are moving on to the final battle report I wanted to cover in this video, and we had 4 players kind of still remaining the day after we did this mega battle event, and we decided, you know what, guys, instead of trying to get a bunch of 1v1s in over the next couple of weeks before the big final showdown, let's just do a 2v2 and we'll get all of our league matches kind of out of the way and be ready to go for the big event. And that's exactly what we did. So me and the Empire player teamed up naturally again, fighting for the cause of Godzilla. And we are going to be facing the Vampire Count player and the Orcs and Goblin player for Team Ghidorah. We set up a very, very funky map, kind of last minute for this. Jokingly, one of the Team Ghidorah players suggested we use my water game mat, and I was like, okay, sure, why not? And then another person was like, hey, yeah, let's just do like some island hopping and set up a real funky board, and all of a sudden the joke became real. And yeah, this map definitely looks a little bit weird, I'm sure, for people not actually playing in this game. But basically what we did was we tried to make a bunch of little pathways, quote-unquote, like island hopping and stuff that you can do with your infantry units to get to each of the main theaters of the battlefield. And that's really about it. The water itself is basically just showing area denial, areas your units can't move to. And other than that, it's just there for kind of aesthetics. But yeah, really funky battlefield. You can kind of almost think of it like the imminent presence of these 2 massive kaiju colliding in our final battle is perhaps flooding the world. At least that's kind of what we were pitching across the battlefield to each other. In terms of the deployment for this battle, I was squared away against the Vampire Count player this time around. And on the opposite side was my Empire ally, and he was going to be fighting the Orcs and Goblin player. At least for the most part, based on like the way all of our units were deployed and the fact that there's tons of deep ocean water surrounding most of our units, and it kind of makes it hard to deviate paths easily, but we'll see what happens during the battle. After deployment, I believe they get the first turn, and they kind of just start shimmying up as many troops as possible. They have a decent amount of range. I get hit by a couple of the cannonballs from the undead side, as well as his corrupted human levy that has some crossbows. I think I lose a knight or 2, and like a couple of my other forward skirmishing units, like my Hound Riders, but not too many heavy casualties on the first turn. The only unfortunate thing I have happen is I believe my steam tank suffers a misfire at some point and takes a wound or 2. But other than that, it actually does pretty good in this game and will land most of its other shots and actually do well in a combat in a turn or 2 that's going to happen against the Grave Guard. My Empire ally is going to be fighting on a big bridge here against the Orcs and Goblin horde. He's going to shoot down most of the Squigs as they mosey across the battlefield. The Black Orc unit is going to kind of tag behind and then throw a big curveball our way and cast Here We Go! And they're actually going to teleport across the battlefield over to my half of the battlefield near the end of the game. But they will take a couple of casualties from the Empire's range attacks. Mainly, he focuses fire on the Squig unit, and he definitely does enough damage by the time they make it into close combat. The only thing the Empire player has that's really not going that well is on the far left side. I don't know if I have a ton of pictures of it. The Orcs and Goblin player has a chariot that charges right into one of the Outrider units, kills them, and then just kind of proceeds to go around the far flank of our board. And I think he eventually wraps around to the rear of the Empire's formation as it's going to be colliding with the Squigs. So that wasn't really too good. Something funny that does happen, though, is as this chariot's just on this full warpath, the Empire player took a saber tooth out of the Storms of Magic book, and he uses it as like a kind of like his mercenary hound for his army. that single hound is going to pass by the chariot, run up the same side of the battlefield, and then kill 2 Doom Diver teams that are set up across the bridge, basically. He'll get like a full flank around and kill 2 units. Absolutely amazing performance out of him this game. But yeah, basically the Empire line is going to clash with the Orcs and Goblins on that bridge, and my Halflings are kind of standing their ground, letting a bunch of shooting attacks out, and then my skirmishing kind of vanguard units are engaging with the undead on that island. And once that's all kind of cleared out, I planned on moving up. But as I already mentioned, the Orcs and Goblin player's going to throw a bit of a curveball at me, and he's going to shift his Black Orc unit over to my side of the battlefield. I don't exactly know why, but it spoke to him. He liked this spot, and when Orcs have a plan, they've got a plan, and he does it. And what happens is, you can kind of see in the photo here, this Black Orc unit is going to shift around the whole main clash that's happening on the island. His Biggins unit also retreated from the Empire side and came around the backside to reinforce the undead. But this Black Orc unit is going to shift around the main battle line, clash into my archers, and then overrun into their favorite unit, the Pantry Guard. And we'll see what happens with that in a little bit. But yeah, other than that, the central battle is kind of unfolding here. The Knights of the Waffle House managed to get vengeance on the Black Knight unit that took them out in the prior game, and they end up clashing into the Free Company unit that the Vampire Count player has. They finish that unit off as well, and then they end up in combat with the Grave Guard, who are also fighting my Steam Tank, and my Vigilantes, who charged in on the flank. The combat is bloody as hell, and there are just so many other units coming in and out of the combat as it goes. The Orcs and Goblin player has a chariot that charges into the flank of my Vigilantes. His Biggins eventually make it into the flank of my Knights, and then the tank. And yeah, basically the Vigilantes all get chopped down. My Knights and my Hound Riders all get chopped down, but my Knights actually had a really good performance this game. Quite proud of them. And yeah, the Grave Guard and the heroes all managed to stand strong in this combat, but man, did they take a lot of casualties. You can kind of see in the photos here, I think he's got like 5 to 8 guys remaining by the end of this. So it was a really bloody skirmish on that island. And yeah, on the opposite side, the Squigs are all cleared up by the Empire player. And he's pretty much just got a clear shot towards the last remaining artillery units on the Team Ghidorah side. That is the Vampire Count's player cannon set up over there, the little horse-drawn one. I like that he's got a skeleton horse drawing it. But yeah, that's pretty much all they got left in like a little Orc Arrow Boy unit. So I'd say that's a cleanup for the Empire on that side. And though my side is rather bloody, the Vampire Count player's taken a lot of casualties, and I dare say a little bit more than I have. And the final thing that will seal the deal in is the Black Orcs charge into my Pantry Guard unit, and yeah, I don't think this should be too big a surprise for people who have been following the Kaiju League, but this matchup has occurred probably 4 or 5 times now. I have the high ground in this situation, not that it matters too much, but I mean, like, you know, I got memes on my side. What does he expect to happen here? And what happens, happens. Every Black Orc gets chopped down, the boss ends up running. I do lose about half of my Pantry Guard unit in the exchange, but yeah, that was a pretty awesome combat. I don't even know if the Black Orc boss actually escaped. He might have gotten caught and killed during the retreat, but that was kind of the ending note of this battle. And believe it or not, this was only, I think, the end of turn 3. So we still had half of a battle to play out. But to make a long story short, unfortunately, the Orcs and Goblin player on the Team Ghidorah team had to get going. I already had some plans set for that day, and basically our tabletop shenanigans just ended up taking a little bit longer than we planned. I talked to my Empire ally, and we were just feeling, you know, like it would be fair enough just to call the game a draw. I do think we had a pretty considerable lead at this point, but in all fairness, the Vampire Count player still had his general and all his heroes alive, and a pretty good chunk of his army. Like, his range line was fully intact. Granted, he did lose the Grave Guard, a lot of the Grave Guard, and the Black Knights also got killed off, but Yeah, I mean, the Orcs and Goblin player had a Biggins unit over there. He still had a Chariot and a couple of units, so I think it was fair enough to call the game a draw at this point, and thus concludes our final standard battle for the Kaiju League. In a couple of weeks, keep an eye out on the channel. I will be dropping the conclusion, the epic final mega battle, where Godzilla and Ghidorah will actually show up and tear each other apart on the battlefield. It'll only be concluded when one remains. I'm really looking forward to it. I know everyone in the league is as well, and I hope you are too. Stay tuned and keep an eye out for it. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.